There were three things James Hollowell knew for certain about the morning everything changed. The porridge was burning. A pup named Clover had just eaten his only clean shirt. And someone, some armed, presumably murderous someone, was creeping through his garden in the gray hour before dawn. So naturally, he grabbed the broom. James Hollowell, 24, wolfless since birth, keeper of an ever-growing menagerie of orphaned wolf pups at the ragged edge of the Thornwood Pack's territory. He had copper-brown hair that never stayed combed, ink stains permanently embedded under his fingernails from writing feeding schedules at midnight, and absolutely no patience for trespassers at 5 a.m. He had been raised to believe he was incomplete. A boy born without a wolf curled in his chest was, by every law of his kind, half a person, fit only for pity or scorn, never for trust. His own father hadn't looked him in the eye for the last 2 years before James left home for good. But the wolves had never cared what the elders said. They came to him the way water finds the lowest point in a valley, inevitably, and without apology. This morning, 11 pups were piled in a heap by the hearth, and a 12th, small, fox-red, perpetually furious, was attempting to climb the bookshelf. James was elbow-deep in burnt porridge when he heard the snap of a twig outside, low and deliberate, the sound of someone trying very hard not to be heard, and failing. He did not think. He grabbed the broom leaning by the door, flung it open, and swung. The broom connected with something considerably more solid than a fox or a poacher. There was a startled grunt, a flash of black wool, and then James found himself staring directly into a pair of storm-gray eyes, belonging to the single most beautiful, most furious man he had ever seen in his life. "You," the man said, rubbing his shoulder with an expression of pure disbelief, "just struck the alphaking of Thornwood. With a broom." James's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "In my defense," he said finally, "you were lurking. I was approaching. At dawn, in the mist, outside my cottage, without announcing yourself. That's lurking, Your Majesty." James lowered the broom, though he did not, notably, drop it. Behind him, 11 pups had abandoned the hearth entirely, and were now crowding the doorway in a tangle of legs and tails, peering up at the stranger with frank curiosity. The fox-red one, Clover, half a sleeve of James's shirt still dangling from her jaws, trotted straight past James's legs and sat down directly on the king's boot, looking enormously pleased with herself. The Alpha King looked down at the pup, looked at the shredded fabric in her mouth, looked, with visible effort, back up at James. "Is that," he said slowly, "my advisor's missing dispatch case leather, or—" "That's my shirt," James said, mortified. "She has a problem. We're working on it." For one long, suspended moment, neither of them spoke. 6 royal guards remained frozen at the tree line, clearly unsure whether they had just witnessed an assassination attempt or the strangest greeting their king had ever received. Somewhere behind James, a pup yawned enormously. Then, and this was the part James would replay in his mind for weeks afterward, turning it over like a smooth stone, the corner of the king's mouth twitched. Just barely, a crack in granite. "You hit a king with a broom," he said, "and your only concern is the shirt." "In my experience," James said, recovering some dignity and stepping back to let the pup pile spill out around his ankles, "kings don't usually get hurt by household cleaning implements. I assumed you'd survive." "I am beginning," the king said, with the air of a man revising several assumptions at once, "to understand why my wolves keep coming here." His name, James learned within the hour, was William Vane, Alpha King of Thornwood, 28 years old, ruler of a kingdom built on cliffs and pine and old, old magic, a man whose wolf had not spoken a single word to him in 7 years. The stories painted him as something carved from winter, a king who had taken the throne in blood, who ruled without flinching and loved nothing, because nothing could touch a man with no wolf left to feel it. The stories, James thought, watching William kneel uninvited on his cottage floor to examine a litter of half-grown cubs with terrible, careful gentleness, had clearly never met the actual man. "They keep coming to you," William said. It wasn't a question. It hadn't been a question the first 3 times he'd said it either, as if repetition might force a different answer out of the universe. "They do." James busied himself salvaging what he could of the porridge, mostly to give his hands something to do that wasn't staring. "I don't know why. I'm wolfless. No bond, no shift, no pack sense. By every measure that matters to your kind, I shouldn't be able to feel them at all. And yet. James set the bowl down with more force than necessary. 12 pups, Your Majesty. Soon to be 13, if the patrol wolf currently watching us from your tree line decides to make a delivery, which, judging by how she's pacing, she will within the hour." William's head turned sharply toward the trees. James watched something complicated cross his face. Recognition, calculation, and underneath it, so faint James almost missed it, something that looked uncomfortably like longing. "You're going to tell me to come with you," James said. "I am. To the capital, to raise pups in a castle, under royal authority, with staff and resources and absolutely no say in the matter." A pause. "You've thought about this before I arrived?" "I've thought about a great many things at 5 in the morning while fighting a pup for possession of my last clean shirt," James said dryly. "Predicting royal demands wasn't difficult. You didn't ride 3 days with an honor guard to admire my garden." For the second time that morning, William's mouth did the almost smile thing. It was, James decided, deeply unfair that a man this insufferable could also look like that when he was amused. "My wolves chose you," William said, and his voice changed, quieter now, stripped of its earlier command. "I need to understand why. Until I do, you and these," he gestured at the pile of pups currently using his boots as a pillow fort, "are coming with me. You'll have everything you need. Healers, staff, space enough that you won't be elbow deep in burnt porridge at dawn." "And if I refuse?" William looked at him then, really looked, the winter gray eyes unreadable. "You won't." Confident, because refusing means leaving them behind. He nodded at the pups. "And I don't think you've left anything behind in your life that needed you. Not once." James opened his mouth to argue, and found, infuriatingly, that he had nothing to say to that. The journey to the capital took 3 days, and somewhere in the second hour, a wild gray she-wolf emerged from the pines and deposited a wailing pup directly into the supply wagon, bringing the count to 13. By the second evening, a pair of amber-eyed siblings who refused to be more than a foot apart brought it to 15. James named the new ones as he had named all the others: Bramble for the gray one, who immediately tried to eat his bootlace, and Wren and Sable for the siblings, who slept tangled together like one creature with 2 heads. Naming mattered. It turned strays into family. William rode at the head of the procession and did not look back, not once, in 3 days. James told himself he didn't notice. He noticed. On the second night, after the siblings had been settled and counted, camped beside a river loud enough to swallow conversation, James was coaxing Bramble into a nest of blankets when the wagon's canvas flap lifted, and William stood there, silhouetted black against the firelight, looking like a man who had come to deliver either very good or very bad news, and hadn't yet decided which. "Walk with me," he said. "It's the middle of the night." "I'm aware of the hour, Hollowell. I asked anyway." James glanced back at the pile of sleeping pups. "If one of them wakes, and I'm not here, my guards will manage." A beat. "They've been informed that failure means facing 15 extremely judgmental pups, which I understand from Bramble's reaction to my boots this morning is a genuine deterrent." Despite himself, James laughed, a short, surprised sound. William's expression flickered, something pleased and almost shy moving across it before the ice reasserted itself. They walked to the riverbank in silence, the king immaculate even after a full day's ride, James acutely aware of the dirt under his nails and the general state of a man who had spent the last 3 days as a portable pillow for a litter of wolves. The moon hung full and silver over the water. "You've named them," William said finally. "They're not cargo. They deserve names." James crossed his arms. "Why does that surprise you?" "Because most people," William said slowly, "see what they're worth before they see what they're called." That's a deeply depressing way to look at children. "They're wolves." "They're children," James repeated more firmly. "Wolf or not." And I'd think a king with eyes that watch a pup curled in mud like it's the most interesting thing he's seen in years would understand that better than most. Something shifted in William's face, that flicker again, raw and unguarded, for just a heartbeat before the wall came back up. He turned to the water instead of answering directly. "When we reach the capital," he said, voice returning to its controlled cadence, "you'll have quarters in the East Wing, full staff. You'll answer only to me. And in exchange? You do what you've already been doing. Raise them. Help them become what they're meant to be." A pause, longer this time. "And you tell no one what you sense in me. Or rather, what you don't." James went very still. "Your wolf is silent." The words came out flat, rehearsed, like something William had said to himself 1,000 times in the dark, and never once aloud to another living person. "Has been for 7 years. Until I understand why my wolves keep choosing you of all people, you say nothing. And if I agree, you'll have my protection in writing. The pups will be cared for regardless of what happens to me." "That's not what I asked." James stepped closer, close enough to feel the strange, bone-deep cold radiating off him. A cold that should have belonged to a man, not a wolf, not a void. "What happens to you, William?" William's jaw tightened. For the first time since James had met him, he looked, not commanding, not regal, but young. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I don't intend to find out tonight," he said. "Do we have a bargain, Hollowell?" James thought of Bramble's small heartbeat against his chest that morning, fluttering like a trapped bird until it calmed. He thought of every pup who had trusted him simply because he had never once given them a reason not to. "We have a bargain," he said. "But I want you to know, I don't think you're as silent as you believe." He didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked back toward the wagon, leaving William alone by the water with an expression no one, not even his own guards, was permitted to see. The capital rose from the valley in spires of dark stone, and the streets emptied of nothing but stairs as the procession passed. James kept the wagon's flap closed and held little Bramble against his chest, while whispers chased them through the gates. The wolfless one. Why would the king bring a wolfless one here? What is he, some kind of beast keeper? And told himself, not for the first time, that he had survived worse than whispers. The East Wing was grander than anything James had ever imagined. 6 interconnected rooms, vaulted ceilings, tapestries worth more than his father's entire farm. A silver-haired steward named Michael, sharp-eyed, no-nonsense, the kind of man who ran an entire wing on efficiency alone, informed him crisply that he would have a staff of 8 and access to the East Wing only, escort required beyond it. "A gilded cage," James murmured, looking around the absurd luxury of it. "A cage, nonetheless," Michael agreed, with the faint, dry humor of a man who had clearly survived decades of palace politics. "I'd get comfortable, Master Hollowell. His Majesty doesn't do things by half measures, and he has never installed a guest in the East Wing before. Ever." Before James could ask what that meant, the door swung open without a knock, and a young lord swept in like he owned the floor he walked on. He had golden brown hair styled with deliberate carelessness, sharp hazel eyes, and the kind of bearing that came from never once being told no. "So this is him," the lord said, circling James the way a cat circles something it intends to eat, slowly. "The wolfless wonder." Michael bowed stiffly. Lord Charles, I wasn't informed. I go where I please. Charles stopped directly in front of James, looking him up and down with an expression somewhere between contempt and calculation. You don't look like much. And you are? A flicker of surprise crossed Charles's face. Clearly he wasn't accustomed to being asked. Charles Ashford, he said, recovering with a thin smile. Son of Lord Commander Ashford, future consort of Thornwood. Or I was, until His Majesty decided to bring home a charity case. The word consort landed in James's chest like a dropped stone, sharper than it had any right to be, considering he'd known the king for exactly 3 days. I'm not here to be anyone's consort, James said, evenly. I'm here to raise orphaned pups. Nothing more. Is that what he told you? Charles laughed, a brittle, glittering sound. The king does nothing without reason. If he brought you here, it's because you're useful to him somehow. And when he's finished using you, he leaned in, voice dropping, he'll discard you, the way he discards everything that gets too close. Lord Charles, Michael said, sharp with warning. Charles ignored him, eyes locked on James, something genuinely cruel surfacing beneath the polish. Ask him what happened to his mate. Ask what he did when he died. Then tell me if you still think you're going to be the one who fixes him. He swept out before James could respond, leaving the words hanging in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. His mate. James stood very still in the enormous, beautiful room, surrounded by sleeping pups and a silence that felt suddenly much colder than it had a moment before. 3 days passed before James saw the king again. He spent them learning the castle's strange rhythms, which corridors led nowhere, which servants flinched at the word wolfless, which ones, like the kind-eyed healer he hadn't yet properly met, simply knelt on the nursery floor and let a pup climb into their lap without comment. Then, on the morning of the 4th day, Michael appeared at his door with the particular stillness of a man delivering bad news as gently as possible. You've been summoned to the Great Hall, he said. The king is holding court. Lord Commander Ashford has demanded an explanation for your presence, and His Majesty has chosen to provide one. Publicly. James's stomach dropped. Publicly. Before the nobles, the pack leaders, the council. Michael's mouth pressed thin. I won't pretend this will be pleasant, Master Hollowell, but His Majesty rarely does anything without a reason, and he asked for you by name. The clothes that arrived an hour later were finer than anything James had ever owned. Deep green wool, simple in cut, but unmistakably costly. He stared at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. You're still wolfless, he reminded himself. No coat changes that. The great hall was enormous, pillars of black stone rising to a vaulted ceiling painted with old hunts and older battles. Hundreds of nobles filled the space, and at the far end, on a raised dais, sat the king. Black as always, a crown of silver thorns resting in his dark hair, his face carved from ice. Beside him, in a seat of honor he clearly hadn't earned through merit, Charles Ashford glittered in gold, smiling like a man who already knew how the story ended. James walked the length of the hall alone, every step echoing, whispers rising around him like smoke. Wolfless. Truly wolfless. The king has lost his mind. He reached the dais and bowed, heart hammering loud enough he was certain the front row could hear it. Rise, William said. James obeyed, lifting his chin, meeting those winter-gray eyes without flinching. Lords of Thornwood, William said, and the hall went silent at once. You have questions about the man before you. I will answer them. Lord Commander Ashford stepped forward, a massive man with a warrior's build and a politician's patience. Your Majesty, with respect, this is unprecedented. A wolfless man housed in the royal wing? The pack deserves an explanation. You're right, William said. They do. He rose from the throne, and the hall went stiller still. 3 months ago, my border patrol reported something unusual. Wild wolves were crossing into human territory. carrying pups, leaving them at a single location. Not pack wolves, ferals. Creatures who answer to no alpha, follow no hierarchy, obey no command. His gaze swept the crowd. And yet they were bringing their young to one man, a man without a wolf of his own, a man your elders cast out and left to die at the edge of nothing. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Feral wolves are beasts, Lord Ashford said. Their judgment means nothing. Does it? William descended the steps slowly, stopping directly in front of James. Because I have spent 7 years trying to understand why our packs are weakening, why fewer pups survive to shifting age, why our strongest wolves are dying before their time. A beat. And in 3 months, this man has raised more orphaned pups to health than our royal healers have managed in 3 years. The whispers changed tone. Confusion now, threaded through with something almost like respect. He will remain in this castle under my protection, William continued. He will continue his work, and anyone who interferes with him, threatens him, or harms him in any way will answer to me personally. His gaze found Charles, who had gone very pale. Do I make myself clear? The silence that followed was absolute. One by one, the nobles bowed their heads. Lord Ashford was the last to submit, his bow shallow, his expression murderous, but he bowed. William turned back to James, and for one unguarded moment, the ice in his eyes thawed. You may return to your quarters, he said quietly. Your pups are waiting. James curtsied, bowed, rather, still unused to the motion, mind reeling. He had been defended, publicly, fiercely, without hesitation, by a king who, 3 days prior, had nearly broken James's nose with his own shoulder for swinging a broom at him. Why? That night, a servant arrived at his door with a small wooden box and instructions that James open it alone. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay a pendant, silver, shaped like a wolf's paw print with a single moonstone at its center. Beneath it, a note in precise, controlled handwriting. This belonged to my mother. She believed wolves could sense what others could not. She was right. Wear it or don't, but know that as long as you are under my roof, no one will touch you. James lifted the pendant, feeling its weight settle cool and certain in his palm. He clasped it around his neck and, for one impossible heartbeat, could have sworn he felt something stir far away in the castle. A whisper of warmth in a vast and terrible silence. Gone before he could be sure it had been real at all. It happened 3 nights later, far sooner than James expected anything to happen, sooner than he was ready for. He woke to screaming, not human, the high, shattering sound of an animal in agony, the kind that climbed straight up the spine and lodged somewhere behind the ribs. James was out of bed and running before he'd fully processed what his feet were doing, following the sound through unfamiliar corridors, with nothing but instinct and dread guiding him. The screaming led to the west wing, the king's private chambers, where 2 guards stood frozen outside a door, faces bone white. You can't go in, one stammered. His Majesty's orders. No one... Another scream tore through the stone, and James felt it in his teeth. Not just pain, grief. The sound of something being torn apart from the inside. He didn't ask permission. He pushed past the guard, ignored the hands grabbing for his arms, and shoved the door open onto a scene that stopped his heart cold. William was on the floor, caught in a shift that refused to complete. Fur and skin and something terrible in between, his body convulsing, jaws open in a silent howl. 3 healers hovered uselessly nearby, chanting half-remembered words over a wound none of their herbs could touch. Out, James said. All of you. Now. Something in his voice, flat, absolute, brooking no argument, sent them stumbling for the door. And then James was alone, with the king who was dying in front of him, one piece at a time. He dropped to his knees beside the writhing, half-formed body. Up close, the wrongness was unmistakable. This wasn't an animal losing a fight against its own nature. This was something fighting back, clawing at invisible bonds, thrashing against chains no eye could see. William. James pressed his palms flat against the heaving, twisted form, ignoring the impossible heat radiating off broken fur and human skin, both. Listen to me. I'm here. Wild, agonized eyes found his. For one unbearable second, James saw the man underneath the beast. Terrified, drowning, utterly alone, in a way no person should ever be alone. I'm here, he said again, and reached. Not with his hands this time, but with the wordless, nameless thing that lived where his wolf should have been. That broken, empty place every elder had told him made him less. He reached into William's pain and wrapped himself around it like a hand closing around something falling. I'm here. You're not alone. I'm here. The convulsions slowed. Ragged gasps steadied into something resembling breath. And then, impossibly, the shift reversed. Not forward into wolf, but backward into man, bones and fur receding until William lay shaking and human and bare on the cold stone floor. His eyes opened. You, he breathed. Me. James's hands were trembling too, now, though he didn't move them from where they rested against William's chest. What was that? William didn't answer right away. He was staring at James with an expression that defied every story James had ever heard about the cold, unfeeling king. Wonder, and underneath it, something that looked almost like fear. You reached him, he whispered finally. My wolf. He was slipping away, dying, and you pulled him back. James looked down at where his palm still rested over William's heart and felt the warmth radiating up through his fingers. Actual warmth, not the deathly chill that had hung around the king since the moment James first met him. You're warm, he said, startled. I know. William's laugh came out broken, half a sob. I haven't been warm in 7 years. 7 years. Since his mate had died. Since his wolf went silent. What happened to you? James asked softly. What happened to your mate? The warmth vanished from William's eyes instantly, like a door slamming shut. You should go, he said. The healers will wonder. Let them wonder. James didn't move. You almost died. That isn't your concern. You made the pups my responsibility the moment you brought us here. James's voice didn't waver. That makes you my responsibility too, whether you like it or not. The words hung between them. Bold, reckless, undeniably true. William stared at him for a long moment, something cracking behind the ice in his eyes. His name was Edmund, he said finally, so quietly James almost missed it. He was my mate, my heart, my everything. His voice went hollow. And I killed him. The confession dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. The crack closed as fast as it had opened. William pushed himself upright, dragging a robe around his shoulders and distance back over his face like armor. Forget what you heard, he said. That's an order. I can't forget that. You will. He turned, and his eyes had gone winter cold again. Because if you keep pushing, if you keep reaching, trying to fix something you don't understand, you'll learn things you can't survive knowing. He summoned the guards to escort James back to the East Wing, and James went, though every step away from that room felt wrong in a way he couldn't name. But as the cold stone corridors blurred past, he kept turning over what he'd felt when he reached into William's pain. His wolf hadn't been dying naturally. It had been trapped, bound, and whoever had done the binding was still holding the chain. The next morning, James found the castle's gentlest healer, a kind, soft-spoken man named Daniel, who had a gift for calming frightened pups and an even rarer gift for honesty, kneeling in the nursery, feeding a bottle to the newest silver-furred arrival. I need to ask you something, James said. About the king's mate. Daniel's hand stilled on the bottle. That isn't a subject people discuss, he said, carefully. Not if they want to keep their position. Or their head.
I'm not asking for gossip. Last night his wolf nearly died, Daniel. I reached him, pulled him back somehow, and what I felt in there wasn't grief dying naturally. Something is holding him down. Daniel's face went pale. He set the bottle aside, slowly. What I'm about to tell you could get us both killed, he whispered. You understand that? Yes. So Daniel told him. Of Edmund, beloved by everyone who met him, true mated to William from the moment they crossed paths. Of the Ashford family, who had been promised the crown for generations and never forgave the insult of being passed over. Of a false border conflict that lured William away the very week Edmund's labor began, for true mates could, in this kingdom's old magic, carry a child between them regardless of who bore the burden, and Edmund had chosen to carry theirs. Of Magnus Ashford, Charles's uncle, the royal healer who attended that birth alone, and who was quietly banished afterward for failing to save the prince consort, yet who somehow still lived in comfortable exile in the northern reaches, protected by Ashford gold. By the time William returned, Daniel finished, voice barely audible, Edmund was dead. The child was dead, and his wolf, he trailed off. They say he didn't shift back for weeks, tore half the castle apart, and when he finally came back to himself, his wolf had gone silent. Not dead, not gone, bound, chained to that single moment of grief, forever. James felt the pieces lock into place with sickening clarity. A staged threat to draw the king away. An Ashford healer, alone with Edmund at the moment of his death. A death that conveniently cleared the path to the throne. It was a trap, he breathed. They murdered him. You can't prove that, Daniel said, urgent. The Ashfords are too powerful, even now. There's nothing. There's always something. The weeks that followed brought more wolves. 2 the first week, 3 the next, until the nursery that had once held 15 now held 23 small, restless souls, and James's days blurred into a constant rhythm of feeding, bandaging, and counting heads before bed. But they also brought something else, something James hadn't expected and didn't entirely know what to do with. William began appearing in the nursery at odd hours, never announced, always with some flimsy pretext, checking on the pup's progress, a matter of household budgeting, ensuring the new wing's foundations were sound. James let him keep the pretenses, mostly because watching the Alpha King of Thornwood attempt to look dignified while a pup gnawed determinedly on the hem of his ceremonial coat was, frankly, the best entertainment James had had in years. You could simply say you wanted to see me, James told him one afternoon, not looking up from the bandage he was wrapping around Rowan's bruised paw. It would save you inventing excuses involving foundation stones. I have no idea what you mean. William was crouched on the floor, very carefully not looking pleased with himself, while Moss, smallest of the original litter, fiercely loyal, climbed determinedly up his sleeve toward his shoulder. I was simply passing through. The East Wing is not on the way to anywhere, Your Majesty. I checked. Twice. William's ears went faintly red, which James found absurdly satisfying for a man who had, mere weeks ago, leveled an entire hall of nobles into silence with a single sentence. Fine, William said, with the air of a man surrendering very important territory. I wanted to see you. And them. He glanced down at Moss, now firmly installed on his shoulder, chewing thoughtfully on a lock of his dark hair. Mostly you. Liar. You like the pups more than you like me. I refused to dignify that with a response. That's because it's true, and you know it. James tied off the bandage and sat back, grinning despite himself. Admit it. You came here the first time fully intending to be cold and regal and terrifying, and Bramble destroyed that plan within the hour by stealing your boot. She did not steal my boot. She tried. I saw her eyeing the laces.
William huffed something that was almost a laugh, and James felt it land somewhere warm in his chest. A small, private victory he intended to collect a great many more of. It became a habit, those visits, sometimes brief, sometimes stretching long into the evening. William seated cross-legged on the nursery floor, in clothes too fine for wolf fur and porridge stains, learning each pup's name with a seriousness James found unexpectedly moving. He asked about Thistle's fever, remembered which siblings refused to be separated, brought small, useless gifts that were really, James suspected, excuses to linger. A carved wooden wolf for Rowan. Soft blankets dyed the exact copper of James's hair, which William pretended was a coincidence, and James pretended to believe. One evening, James attempted to bake bread for the staff, an experiment that ended, predictably, in disaster. A loaf so thoroughly blackened that even Clover, who ate nearly everything, sniffed it once and walked away in clear disgust. "This is an insult to bread," William said solemnly, holding the ruined loaf at arm's length like evidence in a trial. "I'd like to see you do better, Your Majesty. I am a king. I do not bake. You're a coward, is what you are." That earned him a raised eyebrow and, 20 minutes later, an actually competent loaf produced by William's own hands, flour dusted across his sleeves and one streak of it, inexplicably, across his cheekbone. James reached up without thinking to brush it away, and the air between them went very still. William's breath catching, his eyes dropping briefly to James's mouth before he caught himself and stepped back, color high on his face. "For the kingdom's sake," William said, voice rougher than usual. "I should probably teach the cooks to bake. You're a menace with an oven. You're deflecting. I am a king. I'm allowed to deflect." James laughed, delighted, and didn't push. Not yet. But he noticed, with quiet satisfaction, that William found a reason to visit the nursery again the very next evening, and the one after that, and that the cold that had once clung to him like a second skin grew thinner and thinner with every shared, ordinary, ridiculous hour. There were quieter moments, too, tucked between the teasing. Evenings when the pups had finally settled, and James found William simply there, sitting in the dim firelight with a sleeping cub curled against his chest, watching the flames with an expression James was slowly learning to read. Not the ice the court saw, but something unguarded and a little lost. A man relearning, piece by piece, how to simply exist in a room without bracing for the next blow. On one such evening, James settled beside him without a word, close enough that their shoulders touched, and felt, for the first time without reaching, without trying, a faint warmth pulse through the contact, steady as a heartbeat. "You felt that?" William murmured, eyes still on the fire. "Yes." James didn't move away. "Is that him? Your wolf?" "I think," William said slowly, like a man testing ice over a frozen lake, unsure yet if it would hold his weight. "He likes you rather more than he likes me, most days." "Smart wolf." William finally looked at him then, something soft and unguarded breaking across his face in the firelight, and James thought, not for the first time, that he would very much like to be the reason that particular expression kept happening. James began carefully, listening more than asking, befriending the staff who had served the castle 7 years ago and still remembered. An old groundskeeper recalled Charles trailing Edmund everywhere, watching him, learning his routines, in a way that had unsettled the whole household. A guard, posted outside the birthing chambers that night, remembered screaming that wasn't pain, but fear, like Edmund had known exactly what was coming. A maid remembered cleaning those chambers afterward and finding, strangely, almost no blood at all for a death blamed on hemorrhage. Thread by thread, the tapestry came together. And it was Charles himself, of all people, who handed James the final piece. They crossed paths in the gardens one gray evening, frost just beginning to silver the hedges. "You've been busy," Charles said, falling into step beside him uninvited. "Asking questions, talking to servants. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" "I didn't particularly care if you did." Charles laughed, sharp and surprised. "Brave. Or stupid. Possibly both. He stopped, turning to face James fully, something glittering behind the polished cruelty in his eyes. You want to know what really happened to the sainted prince consort? You think if you piece it together, you can fix him. Can I? No. Charles stepped closer. Because what's broken in William was broken deliberately. And the one who broke it has absolutely no intention of letting it heal. James's blood ran cold. You. My uncle is a healer in comfortable retirement. Nothing more. But satisfaction shone in Charles's eyes, unmistakable. He leaned in, voice dropping to something almost gleeful. His wolf is bound to his guilt. As long as William blames himself for Edmund's death, the binding holds. And here's the beautiful part. His smile turned vicious. He can never be free unless he lets go of that guilt. But letting go means admitting Edmund was murdered, admitting he failed to protect him, admitting that everything he suffered for 7 years was caused by people he trusted. He spread his hands. He'll die before he admits that. His pride won't allow it. And I'll have my throne one way or another. Marry him to secure his legacy, or watch him fade and let the council name my father regent. Either way, the Ashfords win. James's hands curled into fists at his sides. I won't let that happen. You won't let it? Charles's laugh rang bright with contempt. You're nobody. What could you possibly do? I pulled his wolf back from death, James said, very quietly, when your family's binding nearly finished what they started 7 years ago. I reached him. I anchored him. Whatever curse your uncle wove into his grief, I broke through it once. I will break through it again. The amusement drained from Charles's face entirely. Stay away from him, he hissed, all pretense gone, or I will destroy you, your pups, every soul you've ever cared about. I will burn it to the ground. He swept away, and James stood alone in the darkening garden, heart hammering, more certain than he had been about anything in his life. He had his answer now. Understanding the trap wasn't enough. He had to break it. And to do that, he needed the one thing William had refused, again and again, to give anyone: his trust. That same night, James went quietly to Michael and asked him to begin discreetly compiling what the household staff had told him: names, dates, the maid's account of the empty chambers, the guard's account of the screaming. If I'm right about the Ashfords, he said, the king will need proof his own council can't dismiss. Gather what you can, quietly. Michael studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, grim and resolute. Quietly, he agreed. I have friends in the city watch who owe me favors. Give me a few days. James found him on the battlements at midnight, alone against the wind, snow beginning to spiral down out of a black sky and catch in his dark hair. You should be asleep, William said, without turning. So should you. A ghost of something almost like amusement crossed his profile. I don't sleep much these days. Then, quieter. Why are you here, Hollowell? Because I know about Edmund. James moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the strange cold still clinging to his skin. I know the border conflict was staged to pull you away. I know Magnus Ashford was alone in that room when he died. I know the Ashfords have been waiting 7 years for you to marry Charles or die so they can finally take what they believe was always theirs. William went rigid as stone. Who told you this? Everyone. No one. James shook his head. The pieces were scattered across a dozen frightened conversations. Your people have always known, William. They've simply been too afraid to say it where you could hear. Michael is gathering it all now. Names, witnesses, dates. Something your council won't be able to wave away. His hands gripped the stone railing until his knuckles went white. You're wrong. I'm not. You have to be. He turned, eyes wild now, desperate in a way James had never seen on him. Because if you're right, then I failed him.
I let them take him from me. I rode off chasing a lie while they... His voice broke entirely. James reached for his hand without thinking, covering it where it gripped the railing. You didn't let them do anything. They planned this for months, maybe years. You couldn't have known. I should have known. I was his mate, his alpha. I was supposed to protect him. The words tore out of him like a wound reopening. Instead, I rode off chasing shadows while they killed him in our own bed. And your wolf has been punishing you for it ever since, James said gently. That's why he went silent. Not because the bond broke, because you blamed yourself so completely he couldn't bear to feel what you were feeling. So he retreated. And someone used that grief, that guilt, to chain him there. You keep saying bound, William said, voice raw. Because it's true. I felt it the night I reached him. He's not dying of natural grief, William. He's trapped, forced to relive that single moment over and over, because something is holding him there on purpose. James lifted a hand to William's face. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Magnus was a healer, but he was something else, too. Something this kingdom banned generations ago. Understanding dawned, terrible and slow, in William's eyes. A witch. A blood witch. The darkest kind. He used Edmund's death, the snapping of your bond, to bind your wolf in that exact instant of grief. As long as you carry the guilt, the binding holds. Then it holds forever. William's voice had gone bleak. Because I will never stop blaming myself. If I let go of the guilt, I let go of him. No, James shook his head fiercely. You let go of the lie. The guilt isn't love, William. It's a chain someone forged specifically to keep you from ever being free of it. Edmund wouldn't want you bound by it for the rest of your life. He'd want you to live. You didn't know him. No, but I know you. James's hand slid from his cheek to rest flat over his heart. I know you've spent 7 years punishing yourself for something that was never your fault. I know your wolf is dying because you won't let him grieve properly, won't let him rage at the people who actually did this. Let me help you. Let me reach him again. Let me show him he's allowed to stop hurting. You don't understand what you're asking. Then show me. He stared at James for a long moment, snow falling between them, the wind howling around them. Then he kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, hungry, the kiss of a man drowning and finding air for the first time in years. His hands tangled in James's hair, and James felt the heat of him blazing against his skin. But beneath the heat, he felt something else. His wolf, rising, reaching back. James gasped against his mouth, and William pulled back, eyes wide with shock. You felt that, he breathed. Yes. James was shaking too, now. He's there. He's trying to reach me. That's impossible. You're wolfless. You shouldn't be able to... I know what I'm not supposed to be able to do. James grabbed his hands, pressed them flat over his own racing heart. I've spent my whole life being told what I can't do. But wolves have always trusted me. Your wolves have been bringing me their pups for months, and now your own wolf is reaching for me, when he won't reach for anyone else. He met William's eyes, fierce and certain. Maybe I'm not wolfless at all. Maybe I'm something else. Something that was always meant for this. For you. William looked at him for a long, unguarded moment. Young and terrified and impossibly hopeful, snow catching in his dark hair like stars. If you try to break the binding, he said quietly, it will fight back. Magnus's magic is old and vicious. Then we fight back harder. You could die. I could. James lifted his chin. But I'd rather die trying to save you than live the rest of my life knowing I never tried. Something broke in William's expression. The last wall, the final defense. Why? He asked, voice cracking down the middle.
Why do you care what happens to me?
James thought of every reason he could give. The pups who needed a stable kingdom, the wolves who had chosen him for exactly this. In the end, only one answer was true. Because somewhere along the way, he said softly, you became mine too. William closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. Then we do this together, he said, whatever it costs. He took James's hand in both of his own, and somewhere deep in the castle, in chambers sealed with old blood and older hate, Charles Ashford received word that his carefully laid plans were beginning, finally, to unravel. He smiled and sent a raven north. They gathered at dawn. James had insisted on witnesses. If he was going to attempt to shatter a blood witch's curse, he wanted people who could testify to exactly what happened. Daniel stood in one corner, pale but resolute. Michael stood beside him, Steward's composure intact even now, a sealed folio of testimonies already in the hands of 2 trusted council members elsewhere in the castle. 3 of William's most trusted guards formed a perimeter, men who had served his father before him. And, arranged in a loose circle on the floor, sat all 23 pups, ears pricked, eyes bright, utterly unbothered by the gravity of the room. "This is madness," Michael murmured, "bringing the pups into this." "They need to be here," James said, kneeling at the circle's center, facing William. "Whatever lets me reach wolves when I shouldn't be able to. It's tied to them. They strengthen it." William sat cross-legged on the cold stone, stripped to the waist, skin pale in the gray morning light. The unnatural chill had returned overnight, worse than before, as if the binding had sensed exactly what was coming for it. "Tell me what to do," he said. "Close your eyes." James placed both palms flat against his chest. "Think about Edmund, not his death, not the grief. Think about who he was, why you loved him. That will only strengthen the binding." "No, the binding feeds on guilt and grief. Love is different. It's the one thing Magnus's curse couldn't account for. It's the one thing it never thought to chain." William closed his eyes. James closed his. And he reached. It was deeper this time, the dive instant and absolute. He felt the cold first, a frozen wasteland of guilt and self-hatred stretching endlessly in every direction. Then the chains, made of memory, every link a fragment of that single terrible day. The false dispatch about the border, the desperate ride through the mountains, the return to chaos, the precise, unbearable second the bonds snapped and William's wolf felt Edmund's heart stop. Each memory dragged the wolf deeper into the ice. But beneath the memories, James found something else. Warmth. Faint. Flickering. Alive. Show me, he thought. Show me who he really was. The memories shifted, and suddenly James was seeing through William's eyes. Edmund laughing in the orchard, sun-bright hair tossed back, chasing a half-grown pup through fallen apples. Edmund cradling a newborn cub with such tenderness it made James's chest ache on William's behalf 7 years late. Edmund reaching for him in the dark, voice low with affection, whispering something James couldn't hear but felt anyway, warm as sunlight through closed eyes. This was what the binding had buried, not the grief, but the joy. The truth that Edmund had been more than a wound. He had been a whole life, fully lived, fully loved. He was real, James told the wolf curled in the dark. He was loved. He was happy. And losing him was a tragedy, not a punishment. Something stirred in the frozen wasteland. It wasn't your fault. You were deceived, betrayed. But you didn't fail him. The people who killed him failed him, and they've been hiding behind your guilt ever since. James pressed deeper, voice steady even as the cold tried to claw its way into his own chest. It's time to let go. Not of him, never of him, only of the lie that you deserve this. Deep in the ice, something cracked. A howl rose from the darkness. Not grief this time. Rage, finally,
after 7 long, silent years. Yes, James thought fiercely. Feel it. Feel everything you've buried. The ice shattered all at once. James was thrown backward as raw power erupted from William's chest, hitting the stone floor hard, gasping, looking up just in time to see something impossible unfold. William's wolf emerged. Not a partial shift, not a fight against his own bones, but a full, magnificent, complete wolf, massive and pale silver, eyes blazing with 7 years of denied fury finally let loose. He threw back his head and howled, and the sound shook the castle down to its foundations. The pups answered as one, 23 small voices rising in a single chorus of welcome. Their alpha was awake. Their alpha was free. William's wolf turned toward James, and for one terrible heartbeat, James feared the rage would simply consume everything in its path. Then the great silver head lowered, and the wolf pressed his muzzle into James's open palm. "Thank you," James felt him say, wordless and overwhelming. "Thank you for finding me in the dark." Tears James hadn't noticed starting streamed down his face as he buried his fingers in that impossible fur. Then the doors burst open. Charles stood in the doorway, flanked by his father's guards, and behind him, supported by 2 attendants, stood an ancient man with white hair and eyes that glittered with old malice. Magnus Ashford. "Well," the old witch said, voice like cracking ice, "it seems the wolfless little thing has been busy." William's wolf spun, placing himself bodily between James and the intruders, a snarl building deep in his throat. "Don't bother." Magnus raised one withered hand, dark energy crackling between gnarled fingers. "My binding may be broken, but I have power enough left to end you both. Then my nephew will finally have what was always meant to be his." "You murdered my mate." William's voice came out of the wolf's throat, impossibly deep, impossibly furious. "You murdered our child. You've been torturing me for 7 years, and I'd do it again." Magnus's smile was cruelty itself. "The throne of Thornwood belongs to the Ashfords. It always has." He raised his hand higher, dark energy gathering like a held breath, and James stood. "You're wrong about one thing," he said quietly. Magnus's eyes narrowed. "Oh?" "You called me wolfless." James walked forward, past William's protective bulk, toward the man who had unmade so many lives. "My whole life, people have called me that. Broken, incomplete, wrong." Behind him, 23 pups rose, forming ragged ranks at his back. "But wolves have never seen me that way. Wolves have always known exactly what I am." Something vast and ancient began rising inside him, something it had taken his entire life to recognize. "I'm not wolfless," he said. "I'm something else entirely." He reached, not for William this time, but for all of them. For the 23 pups who trusted him with everything they had. For the wild wolves who had carried their young to his door across years of winter. For every wolf in Thornwood who had sensed him from a distance and felt, without understanding why, drawn home. He reached, and they answered. Power surged through him like wildfire. Not the strength of one wolf, but the strength of a pack. Dozens, hundreds, all lending their voices to his. Magnus's eyes went wide with terror. "What are you?" "I'm a father of wolves," James said, and unleashed everything he had. The dark energy in Magnus's hands dissolved like shadow before sunrise. The old witch screamed as decades of stolen power shattered all at once, crumpling him to the floor, suddenly ancient, suddenly nothing at all. Charles stumbled back, beautiful face twisted with fear. "Father's guards will do nothing," Michael said, stepping forward. And James saw the 3 trusted guards had quietly been joined by a dozen more. Lord Commander Ashford was arrested an hour ago, on the council's own warrant. The testimonies my people gathered left them no choice. His chambers held evidence of every crime his family has committed.
"This isn't over," Charles spat. "Yes," William said, the shift reversing, magnificent and human and furious and finally free. "It is." The guards seized Charles and his uncle both, and James stood at the center of it all, surrounded by pups and wolves, and the man whose life he had just clawed back from the dark. William came to him. He was warm, truly, permanently warm, his wolf whole and settled and purring with satisfaction beneath his skin. "You called yourself a father of wolves," he said quietly. "I did." "Is that what you are?" James thought of every pup who had ever been left trembling at his door, of the wordless, nameless thing inside him that had drawn wolves to his side his entire life, that the world had insisted on calling a flaw, of the power that had just connected him, however briefly, to every wolf in the kingdom. "I don't know," he admitted, "but whatever I am, I'm yours." William smiled, the first true smile James had ever seen on that carved, beautiful face, and it transformed him completely, ice melting into something warm enough to ache. "Then it's only fair," he said, "that I'm yours too." He kissed James again, soft and slow and full of every promise neither of them had dared to say aloud, and around them 23 pups began to howl with joy. Epilogue: A family built from strays. 6 months later, the kingdom of Thornwood looked nothing like the cold, watchful place James had first ridden into in the back of a covered wagon. The Ashfords had been stripped of every title and acre. Lord Commander Ashford had been executed for treason, the council's verdict swift once the gathered testimonies were laid bare before them. Charles had been exiled to a distant kingdom with nothing but the clothes on his back. Magnus, ancient and powerless, had died in his cell within weeks, his stolen years finally catching up to him all at once. But the deeper change was quieter, harder to see unless you knew to look for it. Wolves who had been driven off years ago began returning to the pack. Pups who would have died now thrived under James's care, in a nursery that had grown 3 times its original size to hold all 23, soon to be more. And the Alpha King, once carved from winter, now walked his own halls with warmth simply radiating from him, like something that had been frozen shut for years and had finally thawed. James stood on the balcony of their shared chambers one evening, watching the sun bleed gold and rose across the mountains. William's arms wrapped around him from behind, his chin resting against James's shoulder. "Daniel and I finished the new wing today," James said. "Room enough for 30 more if your wolves keep bringing them." William's arms tightened. "They will. They've decided you're theirs to provide for, and wolves are nothing if not stubborn." "I wonder where they got that from." "Absolutely no idea." William pressed a smile into the curve of James's neck. "I love you," he said, still a little disbelieving every time, as if the words might disappear if he said them too carelessly. "I never thought I'd say that again and mean it." James turned in his arms, lacing their fingers together, feeling William's wolf brush gently against that wordless place inside him that had once been called broken, and was, he understood now, the truest part of him. "I love you too," he said, "even though you're insufferable. Even though you once let an entire honor guard watch your future mate hit you with a broom." "In my defense," William said gravely, "I was lurking." Small feet pattered across the balcony stones before James could answer. Bramble bounded up first, nearly grown now, followed by Wren and Sable, still inseparable. Then Clover, older, marginally less larcenous, though she eyed the hem of James's sleeve with familiar intent. And a wave of the rest behind them, until 23 wolves had gathered around the 2 men who had become, against every law and every expectation, their family. William knelt among them, laughing, actually laughing, the sound still a little rusty with disuse, but real, and growing more familiar by the week, as he was promptly swarmed and licked and climbed over by a pile of pups who had decided, with the absolute certainty only wolves possessed, that their alpha and their father had finally found each other.
James sank down beside him, into the warmth and the noise and the love of it, and thought of every person who had ever called him incomplete. Broken, unworthy. He had built a family instead. He had found a mate who loved him without condition. He had reached into the dark and pulled a king back from the edge of it. And he had learned, at last, that the thing the world had called his greatest weakness had always, quietly, been his greatest strength. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, in the wild dark of the mountains, a lone wolf lifted its head and howled. One by one, others answered, a chorus rising and carrying across the whole kingdom, singing for their father of wolves, singing for their alpha, singing for a family risen against every odd from the ashes of 7 silent years. And on the balcony, surrounded by everything he had ever wanted and never thought he'd be allowed to keep, James sang with them. Later, long after the pups had finally tired themselves into a heap of sleeping fur across the balcony stones, William drew James back against his chest, the two of them watching the last color drain from the sky into a soft, star-pricked dark. "Marin asked me today," William murmured against his hair, "whether the kingdom should expect an announcement soon." "And what did you tell her?" "That I'd already made one." He pressed his lips to James's temple. "The day I gave you my mother's pendant. Everyone in this castle has known since before either of us admitted it aloud." James huffed a quiet laugh, fingers tracing absent circles over the back of William's hand. "Even Charles knew, apparently, before I did." "Charles," William said dryly, "knew the moment my wolf reached for you on the battlements, and not for him, not once, in all the years he tried." A pause, and something more serious crept into his voice. "I used to think I'd spent everything I had to give, that whatever was left of me after Edmund was a debt, not a person. You never once asked me to be anything other than what I already was, even broken, especially broken." "You were never broken," James said softly. "Just waiting. There's a difference." William turned him gently in his arms, searching his face in the dim light with an expression James had come, in the months since the binding shattered, to recognize as simple, unguarded wonder. The look of a man who still woke some mornings, half convinced this was a dream he'd invented to survive the cold. "Whatever you are," he said, "wolfless or something the old stories never had a name for, I am endlessly grateful my wolves were wiser than I was. They knew exactly what they were bringing home, long before I had the sense to see it." "They're good judges of character," James agreed. "Better than kings, certainly." "Insufferable," William said, but he was smiling when he said it, and he kissed James again, under a sky gone fully dark, surrounded by 23 sleeping wolves, who had, each in their own way, brought them both home.